Prestige Mind Collections presents this audiobook, The Stoic Shield, a practical guide to inner peace and unshakable resilience. Introduction: The Storm and the Fortress. Have you ever felt adrift in a world that never stops shouting? Do you sense a growing tension, a quiet hum of anxiety that follows you from the moment you wake to the moment you rest? We are living in the age of the algorithm, a time of infinite connection that has somehow left us feeling more isolated than ever before. You are navigating a relentless storm of information, expectation, and judgment, a tempest designed to keep you distracted and dissatisfied. Where do you turn for solid ground when the waves of uncertainty threaten to pull you under? What if I told you that this feeling, this struggle for calm in the heart of chaos, is not a modern invention? The greatest minds of history faced plagues, wars, betrayals, and exiles that would shatter the resolve of most people today. Yet, some of them possessed a secret, a timeless operating system for the human mind that allowed them to flourish not in spite of suffering, but because of it. What if you could access that very same system? What if resilience was not a trait you were born with, but a skill you could forge, piece by piece? Imagine possessing a shield, one built not of metal or wood, but of perspective and principle. A shield that could deflect the sting of insults, the weight of misfortune, and the gnawing fear of the unknown. This is the very promise of Stoicism, an ancient philosophy forged for the battlefield of life, and this is the reason you are here. Welcome to the Stoic Shield, a practical guide to inner peace and unshakable resilience, brought to you by Prestige Mind Collections. We are about to embark on a journey together, a journey inward to the only place where true sanctuary can be found, the citadel of your own mind. The world around you is the storm, unpredictable, loud, and utterly outside of your control. You cannot command the winds to cease or the rains to stop. But you can, with practice and with wisdom, build an inner fortress so strong, so well defended, that the storm outside becomes irrelevant. You can learn to stand at the highest window of your fortress, watching the tempest rage, and feel not fear, but a profound and unshakable tranquility. This is not a guide about suppressing your emotions or becoming a cold, unfeeling statue. That is a common and damaging misconception of this profound philosophy. True Stoicism is the exact opposite. It is about engaging with the world fully, with passion and with purpose, but without being enslaved by it. It is the art of transforming fear into prudence, pain into instruction, and desire into virtuous action. It teaches you to distinguish between the fleeting anxieties that scream for your attention and the enduring truths that whisper to your soul. Over the course of this audiobook, we will walk with giants. We will stand beside the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius as he battles a plague and betrayal, retreating to his journal each night to strengthen his resolve. We will listen to the wisdom of Epictetus, a man who was once a crippled slave and rose to become one of history's most influential teachers, proving that the mind can never be chained. We will learn from Seneca, a man who faced political exile and his own death sentence with a calm fortitude that has echoed through the centuries. Their stories, and the stories of others like Nelson Mandela, Theodore Roosevelt, and Viktor Frankl, will not be abstract lectures. They will be our maps, living proof that these principles are not theoretical, they are the very bedrock of a life well lived. Together, we will forge your shield. We will learn the foundational mindset of separating what you control from what you do not. We will practice the art of turning obstacles upside down, finding the path forward not around your challenges, but directly through them. We will explore how to embrace your fate, how to use the thought of your own mortality to live more fully, and how to deal with anger, criticism, and the difficult people you encounter every day. Each chapter is a new layer of steel, a new piece of the armor you are building to protect your inner peace. This is a practical guide. The wisdom within these chapters is meant to be lived, not just heard. As you listen, I encourage you to find a quiet space, to let these ideas sink in, and to reflect on how they apply to your own life, your career, your relationships, your private struggles. If you find this journey valuable, please consider helping others find their way out of the storm. Take a moment to like this audiobook, subscribe for more wisdom from Prestige Mind Collections, and share it with someone you know who is searching for their own shield. Your support helps this timeless knowledge reach those who need it most. The storm is here. It is not going away. But you do not have to be its victim. It is time to stop being tossed by the waves. It is time to build your fortress. It is time to forge your shield. Let us begin. Chapter 1: The Citadel of the Mind, Mastering What Is Yours. How much of your life do you truly command? Think of the precious energy you have spent this past week worrying about things you cannot change, the opinion of a colleague, the state of the economy, the traffic on your morning commute. You are hemorrhaging your most vital currency, your focus, on 1,000 fronts you can never truly conquer. What if there was a single, luminous distinction that could reclaim all of that wasted power and return it to you? A secret so profound it enabled a crippled slave to become the undisputed intellectual master of the most powerful men in Rome. This is not just another mindset, it is the master key that unlocks every other chamber of a tranquil life. It is the simple, revolutionary act of drawing a sacred line in the sand of your reality. On one side of this line lies the infinitesimally small domain of things that are completely and utterly yours. On the other lies a vast and indifferent universe, everything that is not. All human misery, from the slightest irritation to the deepest grief, is born from the confusion of these two territories. Our first, most critical task in forging your shield is to learn, with unshakable clarity, precisely where to draw this line. We will now master the foundational law of Stoicism, the axiom upon which all inner peace is built, the dichotomy of control. And our guide on this first step will be the man whose very life was its most powerful and irrefutable lesson. His name was Epictetus. Imagine a boy born not into wealth or privilege, but into the world as property. Born around 50 AD in Hierapolis, a city in what is now Turkey, Epictetus was sold into slavery and brought to the roaring heart of the empire, Rome. He was owned by Epictetus, a man who was himself a former slave but had risen to become the administrative secretary to the depraved Emperor Nero. Epictetus was a cruel, insecure master, and Epictetus's life was subject to his every whim. He could be beaten, starved, or killed for any reason or no reason at all. His body, his freedom, his very next breath, none of it belonged to him. It was the ultimate state of powerlessness. There is a story, passed down through the ages, that perfectly captures the horror of his situation and the dawn of his legendary resolve. One day, in a fit of rage, Epictetus began to violently twist Epictetus's leg. As the torment continued, the young slave did not scream or beg for mercy. Instead, he looked at his master with a calm, almost analytical detachment and simply warned him, "You are going to break it." The bone snapped. Epictetus, showing no sign of anger or despair, looked at his tormentor again and said, with the same unnerving tranquility, "I told you it would break." Stop and consider the sheer force of will contained in that moment. This was not the response of a man numb to pain. It was the response of a mind that had already drawn the line. Epictetus had realized that his body, his leg, was in the territory of things outside his control. It belonged to his master, to fate, to the brutal whims of the world. But his reaction to the pain, his judgment about the injustice, his own inner character, that was his. That was the one, tiny, unassailable territory that Epictetus could not touch. In that moment, the crippled slave was freer and more powerful than his master. Epictetus had discovered the citadel of the mind. This discovery is the heart of our first lesson. As Epictetus would later teach when he gained his freedom and became a revered philosopher, the first words of his manual, the Enchiridion, are these: some things are up to us, while others are not. This is the dichotomy of control. Let's be ruthlessly clear about what belongs on each side of this line. The list of things not within our control is vast and overwhelming. It includes your body. You can influence its health, but you cannot command it to be free of illness or injury, nor can you stop its aging. It includes your reputation. You can act honorably, but you cannot control what others think or say about you. It includes your wealth, your career, your social status. You can work hard, but you are always subject to market forces, luck, and the decisions of others. The actions of your spouse, your children, your friends, the weather, the government, your own birth and your own death, all of it lies on the far side of the line. We spend almost our entire lives trying to wrestle these things into submission, and this struggle is the fundamental source of our anxiety, anger, and disappointment. It is a fool's errand. It is like shouting at the rain to stop. So, what is left? What is this small, precious territory that is truly ours? Epictetus is just as clear. The things within our control are our judgments, our opinions, our impulses, our desires, and our aversions. In short, the entire inner world of our mind. It is not what happens to you, but your judgment about what happens. It is not the person who insults you, but your opinion that their words are harmful. It is not the job you lost, but your aversion to being unemployed and your desire to have the job back. This is the key. Epictetus realized that nothing external could ever truly harm him, because the only thing that constituted him was his inner character, his faculty of choice, what the Stoics called proheresis. His leg could be broken, but his spirit could not, unless he allowed it to be. He could be exiled from Rome, as he later was, but no one could exile him from his own mind. This is the source of all Stoic power. When you cease to grant external things the power to define your inner state, you become invincible. Let us bring this ancient principle into your modern life. You are stuck in a traffic jam, late for an important meeting. The storm of anxiety begins. Your heart rate rises, you curse the other drivers, you grip the steering wheel in frustration. You are suffering. Now, apply the dichotomy of control. Is the traffic within your control? No. Are the actions of the other drivers in your control? No. Is the time of the meeting in your control? No. What is within your control? Your judgment that this situation is a catastrophe. Your impulse to anger. Your choice to spend the next 30 minutes in a state of self-inflicted misery. What could you do instead? You could recognize the traffic is an external reality, as neutral as a rock or a river. You could choose to use the time productively, to listen to this audiobook, to call a loved one, to simply practice mindful breathing. You change your judgment from "this is ruining my day" to "this is an unexpected moment of stillness." The external situation is identical, but your internal experience is transformed from suffering to peace. Consider your career. Your boss gives you a negative performance review. The sting of criticism feels personal, and fear for your job security sets in. Let's draw the line. Is your boss's opinion of you within your control? No. Is their mood, their biases, their final decision about your promotion within your control? No. What is? The quality of the work you produce. The professionalism with which you receive the feedback. Your judgment about whether the criticism is a personal attack or simply data you can use to improve. Your choice to learn from it with dignity rather than resent it with bitterness. By focusing only on what is yours, the quality of your effort and the character of your response, you reclaim your power and your peace of mind. This is the first and most fundamental practice. For every challenge that confronts you today, I want you to perform this mental sorting exercise. Ask yourself, what part of this is in my control, and what part is not? Then, make a conscious pact with yourself to invest 100% of your energy in what you control and to practice a radical, courageous acceptance of what you do not. This is not passive resignation. It is the strategic and intelligent allocation of your most finite resources, your time, your energy, and your focus. It is the first, thickest plate of steel you will rivet onto your Stoic shield. Epictetus, the crippled slave, became one of the most sought-after teachers of his era. Even the great emperor Marcus Aurelius would later refer to his teachings with reverence. He owned nothing, yet he possessed everything that mattered. He proved that no man can be a victim whose mind remains his own. Your body may be in chains, but your will can remain as free as the sky. Master this one distinction, and you will have laid the foundation upon which an unshakable inner fortress can be built. You will have taken the first great step away from the storm, and into the quiet, unconquerable citadel of your mind. Chapter 2: The Inner Scribe, How Your Judgments Shape Your Reality. What if the world you experience is not the world as it truly is? What if everything you see, hear, and feel is first passed through a powerful, invisible lens inside your mind? This is a lens forged from your deepest beliefs, your quietest expectations, and your most primal fears. Be under no illusion, this lens doesn't just color your reality, it actively creates it. The crucial question, then, is who holds this lens, who polishes it, and who directs its focus? The ancient Stoics taught that our greatest power lies not in commanding the world outside, but in mastering the scribe who writes the story of that world inside our heads. This inner scribe sits at the desk of your mind, ceaselessly interpreting the raw, neutral data of your life. It is the urgent voice that whispers whether a sudden change is a disaster or an opportunity. It is the tireless author who decides if a harsh word is an insult or merely information. This voice, this scribe, is so powerful it can turn a palace into a prison of anxiety, or, as we shall see, a literal death camp into a place of profound and unbreakable meaning. To leave this scribe untrained and unsupervised is to be a puppet to its whims, tossed about by every event that crosses your path. Our task now is to gently but firmly take the pen from this inner author and learn to write our own narrative. If the dichotomy of control we have just learned is the what, the sovereign territory of the mind, then mastering our judgments is the how. It is the active mechanism by which we rule that kingdom. And our teacher for this most vital of lessons will not be a king or an emperor, but a psychiatrist who was stripped of everything but his own mind and, in doing so, discovered the ultimate source of human freedom. Our guide is Viktor Frankl, prisoner number 119,104, in the concentration camps of Auschwitz and Dachau. To understand the miracle of Frankl's discovery, we must first descend with him into the abyss. We must, for a moment, look upon the world as he saw it. The raw data of his life was a relentless symphony of horror. It was the gnawing, endless hunger that turned men into wraiths. It was the freezing Bavarian winters, faced with nothing but thin, striped rags for clothing. It was the arbitrary, casual brutality of the guards, where a man could be beaten to death for looking the wrong way. It was the stench of the crematoria, a constant reminder of the fate that awaited the weak or the unlucky. It was the complete and total loss of identity, reduced from a respected doctor to a nameless number tattooed on his arm. It was the loss of his life's work, a precious manuscript, sewn into the lining of his coat, discovered and discarded like trash. And most terribly, it was the loss of his family, his parents, his brother, and his pregnant wife, all murdered in the camps. In the language of our last chapter, Viktor Frankl was a man who had absolutely nothing left in the column of things he could control. His body, his health, his freedom, his work, his reputation, his loved ones, all were brutally seized from him. He was, by any external measure, the most powerless man on earth. Yet, it was here, in the deepest darkness imaginable, that he discovered a light that no external force could ever extinguish. He discovered the final human freedom. As he later wrote in his masterpiece, Man's Search for Meaning, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. This is the power of the inner scribe. While the SS guards controlled the external reality of the camp, Frankl realized they could not control his interpretation of that reality. Between the stimulus of a guard's blow and his response to it, there was a tiny, sacred space. In that space lay his power to choose. And in that choice lay his growth, his freedom, and his very survival. He began to consciously seize the pen from the scribe that was, in all the other prisoners, writing a story of pure despair. He began to write a different story. He tells of being forced on a pre-dawn march through the frozen mud to a grueling work site. The guards are shouting. The man next to him slips and whispers, "If only our wives could see us now." In that moment, the raw data is misery. The automatic script is despair. But Frankl seizes the pen. He chooses to fill his mind with the image of his wife. He holds entire, detailed conversations with her in his head. He sees her smile, he feels her presence, and he writes, "I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss in the contemplation of his beloved." The inner scribe, under his command, wrote a story of love, and that story was more real and more powerful than the freezing cold. On another occasion, at the end of an exhausting day, a fellow prisoner runs into the barracks, urging them all to come outside to see the sunset. The guards are gone for a moment. They stand together and watch as the whole sky is filled with clouds that were steeped in living light. Frankl saw men, their faces grey, with tears in their eyes. The automatic script of their life was pointless suffering. But in that moment, the scribe, prompted by a shared sense of humanity, wrote a story of beauty. And that beauty was a shield, however temporary, against the ugliness surrounding them. Most powerfully, Frankl began to use his future self to give meaning to his present suffering. A trained psychiatrist, he started to imagine himself in a warm, well-lit lecture hall after the war. He pictured himself giving a lecture to students on the very topic of the psychology of the concentration camp. He looked down upon his present self, the cold, the hunger, the misery, and saw it not as a pointless torment, but as data. As the raw material for a future purpose that would help others. He transformed himself from a victim into a scientist. The inner scribe wrote a story of purpose. This is the profound alchemy of the mind. The events themselves were neutral. A sunset is just atmospheric light scattering. A memory is just a neural pathway. The suffering was just suffering. It was the judgment placed upon these things that gave them their power. This is a perfect, real-world validation of the central teaching of Epictetus, who said nearly 2,000 years earlier, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. The events that happen to us are what the Stoics called phantasiae, impressions, appearances. They are the raw data that flow into our senses. An insult is just a sound vibration. A stock market crash is just numbers on a screen. A medical diagnosis is just words from a doctor. They have no inherent good or bad quality. The suffering, the anxiety, the anger, that comes from the second step, when our inner scribe applies a dogma, a judgment or belief, to that raw impression. The insult, impression, plus this is a threat to my honor, judgment, equals anger. The market crash, impression, plus my future is ruined, judgment, equals panic. The diagnosis, impression, plus this is a death sentence, judgment, equals despair. Viktor Frankl's genius was to prove that even in the most extreme circumstances, we have the power to challenge the judgment. Death camp, impression, plus this is an opportunity to find meaning and help humanity, judgment, equals resilience. So how do we, in our lives which are, thankfully, far from such extremes, practice this godlike power? How do we train our inner scribe? We can distill Frankl's discovery into a three-step practice. First, pause. This is the most crucial step. When you experience a negative event, a criticism from your partner, a sudden rejection, an unexpected bill, you must learn to create that sacred space between the stimulus and your automatic response. The scribe's first draft is always emotional, panicked, and unhelpful. You must train yourself to not act on it. Take a single, conscious breath. This breath is a declaration of sovereignty over your own mind. It is you telling the scribe, wait. I will review your work before we publish. Second, analyze. Look at the automatic story the scribe has written. Isolate the raw impression from the judgment. The raw impression, my colleague was given the project I wanted. The automatic judgment, your scribe wrote. This is a disaster. They think I'm incompetent. My career is over. See how dramatic and absolute that judgment is? See how it leaps from a single event to a sweeping conclusion about your entire worth. Third, rewrite. This is where you consciously seize the pen. You challenge the scribe's first draft and write a more rational, more useful, and truer story. My colleague was given the project. This is disappointing, certainly. But what is the opportunity here? Perhaps this frees me up for something else. Perhaps their skills were a better fit for this specific task. This is not a judgment on my total worth, it is a single business decision. I will focus on my next task and perform it with excellence. You do this again and again. You become a conscious editor of your own thoughts. You are no longer a passive consumer of your scribe's dramatic stories, you are the editor-in-chief of your own mind. This is the daily work of a practicing Stoic. This is how the shield is forged, not in one grand gesture, but in 1,000 tiny moments of conscious, deliberate rewriting. The world provides the canvas and the paint. But you, and you alone, are the artist. You decide whether to paint a tragedy or a masterpiece. Viktor Frankl, surrounded by death, chose to paint a story of love, beauty, and purpose. He proved that the human spirit is not a product of its environment. He proved that the ultimate power lies within. Your task is to wield that same power in your own life. To pick up the pen, and to begin, right now, writing the story you choose to live by. Chapter 3, The Sacred Fire, Learning to Love Your Fate, Amor Fati. What is your immediate, gut-level reaction when things go terribly, irrevocably wrong? For almost everyone, it is a cascade of resistance, a flood of denial, and the mournful, useless question, why is this happening to me? But what if the highest form of wisdom, the most effective response, was not begrudging acceptance, but a joyful and absolute embrace? What if you could look upon the greatest catastrophe of your personal or professional life and not just endure it, but actively welcome it as a necessary and vital part of your path? This is not a detached thought experiment, it is the highest, most formidable, and most liberating weapon in the entire Stoic arsenal. It is a principle so audacious that the great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche gave it a Latin name to capture its sacred power, Amor Fati, a love of one's fate. This is the radical practice of treating every moment, every event, every twist of fortune, especially the painful and unwelcome ones, as if you had chosen it yourself from a list of infinite possibilities. It is the ability to see the raw, chaotic, and often brutal material of your life not as a mistake or a mess, but as the perfect and necessary substance from which you must sculpt your masterpiece. If our previous lessons have helped us forge the hard metal of our shield, Amor Fati is the practice that sets that shield ablaze with a sacred, inextinguishable fire. This transcendent mindset does not just protect you from the blows of life, it teaches you to absorb their energy and use it to burn even brighter. We have already learned to accept what is not in our control and to master our judgments about it. Now, we prepare for the final, most transformative step, we will learn to fall in love with it. Our guide to this fiery alchemy will be a man who was the living embodiment of relentless creation, a titan of invention who, on a cold December night, watched his entire legacy turn to ash and saw in the inferno not an end, but the most spectacular and welcome of new beginnings. Our guide is Thomas Edison. By 1914, Thomas Edison, at 67 years old, had built an empire of ingenuity in West Orange, New Jersey. His industrial research laboratory was a sprawling, 10-building complex that was the envy of the world, a true invention factory. It was the birthplace of the phonograph, the motion picture camera, and countless other innovations that were shaping the modern age. Within its walls were priceless, one-of-a-kind prototypes, meticulously kept records of decades of experiments, and materials for countless projects yet to be born. This complex was more than just a collection of buildings, it was the physical manifestation of Edison's life, the tangible library of his singular genius. And, built largely of reinforced concrete, it was widely believed to be fireproof. On the evening of December 9, 1914, that belief was proven catastrophically wrong. An explosion erupted in the film inspection building. Volatile chemicals used for early motion picture film ignited, and the flames spread with terrifying speed. Fire departments from 8 nearby towns rushed to the scene, but their efforts were futile. The heat was so intense it buckled the steel window frames and cracked the supposedly fireproof concrete. The fire raged out of control, a monstrous, orange vortex consuming a lifetime of work, turning irreplaceable artifacts into smoke and memory. For any normal person, this would be the definitive tragedy, the crushing, final blow. It was the absolute, irreversible loss of something outside of one's control. As the disaster unfolded, Edison calmly walked to the perimeter, watching the spectacle. He was not panicked. He was not despairing. He was, by all accounts, utterly serene. He found his 24-year-old son, Charles, who was anxiously trying to help organize the frantic rescue efforts. Instead of lamenting his loss, Edison spoke the words that would immortalize this moment as a masterclass in psychological power. He looked at his son, his face lit by the glow of his burning empire, and said, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again." Let that sink in. This is not the reaction of mere acceptance. This is not passive resignation. This is active appreciation. This is a man looking at the worst moment of his professional life and seeing in it a terrible and magnificent beauty, a spectacle worthy of being witnessed. He was not just enduring his fate, he was in awe of it. But his most profound insight came later that night, as he stood with a reporter amidst the smouldering, skeletal ruins. "Although I am over 67 years old," he said, "I'll start all over again tomorrow." Then he added the line that perfectly captures the spirit of Amor Fati: "There is great value in disaster. All our mistakes are burned up. Thank God we can start anew." This is the philosophy of the sacred fire. It is the ultimate extension of the dichotomy of control. Once you have fully internalized that an event is outside your power, you have three choices. You can resist it and suffer, asking "Why me?" You can begrudgingly accept it and endure. Or you can do what Edison did: you can embrace it, love it, and immediately begin searching for the gift hidden within the ruins. You can treat it as necessary. The great Stoic emperor, Marcus Aurelius, understood this principle intimately. He wrote in his private journal, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." Think of your mind as this blazing fire. In a normal state, if you throw an obstacle, a setback, a betrayal, onto a small flame, you might extinguish it. But a mind trained in Stoicism, a mind practicing Amor Fati, is a roaring bonfire. It doesn't just block or deflect the things that are thrown into it, it consumes them. It uses the insult as fuel for humility. It uses the financial loss as fuel for resourcefulness. It uses the painful breakup as fuel for self-discovery and resilience. Everything becomes fuel. Nothing is wasted. The fire simply grows stronger and brighter. It is crucial to understand that Amor Fati is not fatalism. It does not mean you should not try to prevent disasters. Edison, after all, had fire safety measures in place, they just failed. It does not mean you lie down and let the world run you over. You fight, you strive, you plan, you work with everything in your power to achieve the best possible outcome. Amor Fati applies to what is. It applies to the past and to the present moment, to those things that are already facts on the ground and cannot be changed. To wish the fire had not happened is, as the Stoics would say, a form of madness. It is to argue with reality. And reality always wins. Amor Fati is the wisdom to stop arguing and start collaborating with whatever reality presents you. So how do we cultivate this sacred fire in our own lives? How do we move from the intellectual idea to a lived reality? We can begin with a simple but powerful mental filter. When you are faced with a setback, you are passed over for a promotion, you receive a frightening health diagnosis, a relationship ends, your inner scribe's first instinct will be to write a story of victimhood. Your job is to intercept that story and run it through the filter of a single, powerful word, necessary. You say to yourself, "This is necessary." At first, it may feel like a lie. But the act of repeating it forces your mind to start searching for reasons why it might be true. Being passed over for this promotion is necessary, because it will force me to reevaluate my career path and find work that is truly fulfilling. This diagnosis is necessary, because it will force me to finally prioritize my health and appreciate every single day. This ending is necessary, so that a new and better beginning can take its place. You are rewriting the script from unwanted curse to necessary catalyst. A second practice is to ask a transformative question in the face of adversity: how can I see this as a gift? This question may seem absurd when you are in pain, but it is a direct command to your inner scribe to find the opportunity hidden within the obstacle. What is the gift of being fired? The gift of freedom, the gift of a new start. What is the gift of a public failure? The gift of humility, the gift of learning who your true friends are. This practice is not about denying pain, it is about refusing to let pain be the final word. It is about insisting on finding the lesson, the advantage, the fuel. You must build this muscle on the small irritations of daily life, so it will be strong enough for the great fires. When your flight is delayed, do not see it as a frustration. See it as a necessary and chosen gift of 2 hours of uninterrupted time to read or think. When you get stuck in traffic, do not see it as an annoyance. See it as a necessary pause, a moment to breathe that you otherwise would not have taken. Every small moment of resistance you can transform into an embrace strengthens your capacity for Amor Fati. Edison, true to his word, started over. He secured a new loan and rebuilt his factory with a relentless energy that stunned his younger colleagues. He used the disaster as a chance to lay out the plant more efficiently. In the end, the fire that should have destroyed him became the catalyst for one of his most productive periods. He did not just endure his fate. He loved it, he used it, and he was strengthened by it. This is the ultimate power. To not only be unshaken by the chaos of the world, but to look it in the eye and say, "Thank you. This too is for me. This too I will use. This is the sacred fire. This is Amor Fati." Chapter 4, The Shadow as a Guide, on the Wisdom of Mortality, Memento Mori. What is the one, inescapable truth that our modern world works tirelessly, ingeniously, to help us forget? It is the final, unassailable fact of your own existence, that one day, it will end. We cleverly hide this truth behind a wall of euphemisms, we distract ourselves with an endless stream of digital trivialities, and we chase our ambitions as if our time here were infinite. But what if this great certainty that we fear and deny is actually the secret key to unlocking our best possible life? What if the regular, sober contemplation of your own mortality was not a morbid obsession, but the most powerful source of joy, purpose, and courage available to a human being? The ancient Stoics embraced this paradox. They had a name for this practice, a two-word mantra of profound and life-altering power, Memento Mori, remember you must die. This was not a grim threat meant to induce despair, but a clarifying tool, not a curse, but the ultimate catalyst for living with virtue and vitality. Think of it as the deep, black velvet background against which the diamond of the present moment is finally revealed in all its precious, multifaceted brilliance. On the great shield we are forging, this practice is the sharpening stone. It is what gives our life its edge, honing our focus to cut through the unimportant and defend what truly matters. Memento Mori is an instrument of clarification. It instantly dissolves petty fears, it cauterizes wasteful anxieties, and it infuses every single moment with a sacred and beautiful urgency. With this practice, you are not learning how to die, you are learning how to finally, truly live. We will now learn to befriend our own mortality, to welcome it not as an enemy, but as our most honest and trusted advisor. And our guide for this journey will be a man who wrote about this principle with unmatched eloquence and was ultimately called upon to demonstrate it with his own life, a man who stared into the abyss and did not blink, the great philosopher-statesman, Seneca. Seneca was one of the most powerful and astonishingly wealthy men in the Roman Empire. He was a celebrated playwright, a shrewd investor, and the personal tutor and later, the chief advisor to the Emperor Nero. He lived in opulent villas, surrounded by luxury and influence. He had everything a person could desire. And yet, as he looked around at the bustling, ambitious society of Rome, he saw a pervasive spiritual sickness, a sickness that is startlingly familiar to us today. He saw people who were constantly busy, but never truly living. In his brilliant essay, On the Shortness of Life, Seneca delivers a diagnosis of the human condition that has lost none of its potency in 2,000 years. His core argument is a stunning reversal of our common complaint. It is not that we have a short time to live, he wrote, but that we waste a lot of it. He saw people giving away their most precious, non-renewable resource, their time, as if it were worthless. They would anxiously guard their property and their money, but allow anyone and everyone to steal their days with pointless meetings, trivial gossip, and meaningless obligations. He saw people endlessly preparing to live, postponing their true happiness until some future date when they would finally retire, or finally be wealthy enough, or finally have the time. Putting things off, Seneca warned, is the biggest waste of life. These people, whom he called the busy, were sleepwalking through their own existence. They were living, but they were not alive. The antidote, he argued, was philosophy, and at the heart of that philosophy was the constant, sober awareness of death. Memento Mori. Remembering that your time is finite is the only thing that will compel you to live deliberately. It is the accountant that reminds you that your account of seconds is not infinite, and it is being depleted with every breath you take. This realization is not meant to be terrifying. It is meant to be liberating. It is the call to stop squandering your life on things that do not matter and to start investing it, right now, in what does: virtue, wisdom, love, and meaning. For Seneca, this was not just a theory. It was a lifelong preparation for a final exam that he knew would one day arrive. And in the year 65 AD, it did. His relationship with his former student, the Emperor Nero, had soured. Nero had descended into paranoia and tyranny, and Seneca had become a target. Implicated in a conspiracy to assassinate the emperor, Seneca was cornered in his villa outside Rome. A centurion arrived, not with a summons to a trial, but with a death sentence. Nero commanded his old tutor to take his own life. This was the moment of truth. All the letters, all the essays, all the years of contemplation, did they mean anything? The historian Tacitus gives us a powerful account of what happened next. Seneca was not shocked. He was not afraid. He was calm, composed, and in complete control of the one thing that was his to command, his own mind. He was, in a very real sense, the freest man in the room. As his wife, Paulina, and his friends began to weep with grief, he gently rebuked them. "Where is your philosophy?" he asked. He reminded them that a life lived in the shadow of a tyrant was bound to end this way. He had been rehearsing for this moment his entire life. Denied access to his will to bequeath his possessions, Seneca turned to his friends and said that he would leave them the one thing of true value that he possessed, the imago vitae sui, the pattern of his life. He then embraced his wife, and fearing that her grief would shatter his resolve, asked her to retire to another room. He calmly had his veins opened by a doctor. As his life slowly ebbed away, he dictated his final thoughts to a scribe, his mind clear and philosophical to the very end. He died not as a terrified victim, but as a teacher giving his final lesson. He proved that a lifetime of remembering death had not made him morbid, it had made him brave, it had made him free, and it had prepared him to meet his end with a dignity that has inspired humanity for millennia. Seneca's death is the ultimate proof of concept. But how do we, who do not live under the threat of a tyrant, apply this formidable practice? How do we wield the shadow as a guide? The first and most direct method is to practice what we might call a last-day meditation. Take a few moments in the morning. Close your eyes and seriously, vividly, contemplate the possibility that this is the last day of your life. Not in a panicked way, but in a clarifying way. If this were the end, what would you do today? What petty argument would you immediately let go of? Which loved one would you call? What fear of rejection or failure would suddenly seem trivial? What beautiful, simple thing, the taste of your coffee, the view from your window, would you take the time to truly appreciate? The point is not to create a morbid fantasy, but to borrow the supreme clarity of that final perspective and infuse it into the day you are actually living. A second practice is to use physical reminders. Throughout history, great men and women have kept Memento Mori on their desks: a skull, an hourglass, a special coin. You can create a modern version. Make the wallpaper on your phone a simple phrase: "Remember you will die." Place a small, unique object on your desk that, to you, symbolizes your mortality. The goal is not to be constantly thinking of death, but to have a gentle, persistent whisper in the background of your life, a whisper that helps you distinguish the signal from the noise. Finally, and most practically, use Memento Mori as the ultimate priority test. When you are agonizing over a decision, stressed about a presentation, or consumed by a petty grudge, ask yourself this one powerful question: in the face of my own death, how much does this truly matter? Watch as the question acts like a solvent, dissolving your trivial concerns. The fear of asking for a raise, the anxiety of speaking in public, the anger at the person who cut you off in traffic, all of it shrinks to its proper, insignificant size when held up against the vast backdrop of your mortality. It clears the stage for what is actually important: acting with courage, speaking with kindness, living with virtue. Seneca taught us that life, long or short, is measured by its depth and its goodness, not its duration. By learning to walk comfortably with the shadow of our mortality, we learn to live in the brilliant, precious, and unrepeatable light of the present moment. Memento Mori is not a prayer for a swift end. It is the most powerful prayer there is for a meaningful life. It is the call to wake up from the slumber of the busy and to become truly, vibrantly, and urgently alive. Right now. Chapter 5: The Obstacle is the Way, Turning Trials into Triumphs. Every path worth walking in this life is beset with obstacles. It is an unavoidable law of nature that our ambitions will be met with resistance and our plans will be tested by adversity. Our first instinct, honed by a culture that prizes ease and comfort, is to curse these barriers, to see them as unjust impediments to our deserved progress. We desperately search for a way around them, a clever shortcut to avoid the confrontation and the pain that they represent. But what if this instinct is profoundly and tragically wrong? What if the obstacle that blocks your path was never in the way, but in fact is the way? What if every impediment you face, every crushing failure, every frustrating setback was not a detour from your journey, but the road itself? Imagine for a moment that this road has been uniquely designed to teach you the exact lesson you need to learn, to forge within you the precise strength you currently lack. This is the profound and practical art of Stoic alchemy, the skill of transmuting poison into medicine, of turning roadblocks into runways for your ascent. We have learned to accept what we cannot change, and we have learned to master our judgments about it, but this new principle demands something more from us. It demands that we actively use what we cannot change as the raw material for our own greatness. It is the wisdom of the pearl oyster, which takes an irritating, unwelcome grain of sand and coats it, layer by layer, with its own essence until it becomes a thing of luminous and precious beauty. Every obstacle, large or small, presents you with this fundamental choice: will you be broken by it, or will you be built by it? In this chapter, we will learn to choose the latter, deliberately and consistently, every single time. This principle is the active, forward-facing aspect of your Stoic Shield. It is not just about deflecting blows, but about harnessing their momentum to propel yourself forward with even greater force. To master this art, we will study the life of a man who failed more spectacularly, more publicly, and more relentlessly for 2 decades than almost any other figure in history. We will learn from a man who was a social pariah and a financial pauper before he became the unshakable, clear-eyed general who saved a nation, Ulysses S. Grant. To truly comprehend the power of turning obstacles into opportunities, we must first walk with Grant through his long, desolate wilderness years. Before he was the hero of the Union, he was a walking monument to failure. After a competent but uninspired early career in the army, serving in the Mexican-American War, Grant found himself utterly lost. Stationed at desolate, lonely outposts on the West Coast, thousands of miles from his beloved wife and children, the crushing obstacles of boredom and isolation began to eat away at his soul. He turned to alcohol to numb the pain, a decision that would create a new and more formidable obstacle, a reputation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In 1854, to avoid the public humiliation of a court-martial for his drinking, Captain Ulysses S. Grant was forced to resign his commission in disgrace. He returned to civilian life a broken man, entering a decade of relentless, soul-crushing failure. He tried his hand at farming on a plot of land his wife owned, a place he ironically named Hardscrabble. The farm failed. He entered the real estate business only to fail at that as well. By the late 1850s, this West Point graduate and former Army captain was a familiar, sorrowful sight on the streets of St. Louis, reduced to selling bundles of firewood just to feed his family, his poverty announced by the worn-out, faded army coat he still wore. He was forced to humble himself by borrowing money from former subordinates and even had to pawn his watch to buy Christmas presents for his children. The obstacles were immense and suffocating: poverty, disgrace, a damaged reputation, and the crushing weight of his own family's disappointment. By all external measures, Ulysses S. Grant was a failure, a man whose potential had been utterly squandered. And then, the greatest obstacle in American history appeared: the outbreak of the Civil War. For the nation, it was an unimaginable catastrophe. But for the destitute, 39-year-old Grant, it was the only way out. It was the one obstacle large enough to transform his life. This is where the Stoic alchemy begins, where we see how every single one of his past failures became the unlikely source of his future strength. The first obstacle, his humiliating resignation from the army, became the source of his unmatched resolve. While other Union generals, men like George McClellan, were cautious political operators, terrified of losing a battle and damaging their pristine reputations, Grant had no reputation left to protect. He had already hit rock bottom. This freed him to act with a desperate, do-or-die audacity that baffled his opponents and electrified President Lincoln. The shame that should have broken him was reforged into a fearless and singular focus on the only thing that mattered: unconditional victory. The second obstacle, his years of poverty and hardscrabble farming, became the source of his brilliant practicality. While other generals were accustomed to the army's rigid, by-the-book logistics, Grant had learned hard lessons in resilience and resourcefulness. He knew how to make do with less, how to live off the land, and how to improvise. This became his strategic genius. During the pivotal Vicksburg campaign, he was faced with an impregnable fortress city. His solution was to do the unthinkable. He abandoned his own supply lines, marching his army deep into enemy territory, knowing they could survive by foraging, a lesson learned not at West Point, but during his bleakest years of failure. The obstacle of the fortress was overcome by a strength forged in the obstacle of poverty. The third obstacle, his reputation for drinking, followed him relentlessly. His political rivals and jealous generals used it as a constant weapon, spreading rumors and trying to turn President Lincoln against him. But Grant turned this obstacle into a lesson in supreme focus. He refused to be baited. He ignored the gossip, the newspaper attacks, and the political maneuvering. He simply did not care what people said about him. He poured every ounce of his energy into the one thing he could control: the movement of his armies and the execution of his strategy. He let his results speak for themselves. The relentless criticism that would have distracted a lesser man only sharpened his concentration. This mindset, the alchemy of turning disadvantage into advantage, was evident in every battle he fought. When faced with a fortified enemy at Fort Donelson, the obstacle of their defenses became the reason for his famous, unyielding demand for unconditional surrender. Later, in the brutal Overland Campaign against the brilliant Robert E. Lee, the Union Army would suffer horrific casualties. Every general before Grant, after such a bloody encounter, had retreated to lick their wounds. The obstacle of the immense human cost had always broken their will. But after the carnage of the Battle of the Wilderness, Grant gave a simple, war-altering command: forward. He used the Union's superior numbers not as something to be cautiously preserved, but as a relentless weapon, turning the gruesome obstacle of attrition into the very path to victory. Grant's life is a masterclass in the Stoic principle articulated by Marcus Aurelius: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The roadblocks in his life, disgrace, poverty, criticism, were the very things that paved his road to greatness. How, then, do we apply this profound principle in our own lives? We are not generals, but we all face our own fortresses and our own wilderness battles. First, you must practice the art of the reframe. When a new obstacle appears, resist the urge to see it as a misfortune. Instead, immediately ask the powerful question: what does this now make possible? A project at work is cancelled? This now makes it possible for you to dedicate your energy to something more important. A sudden injury prevents you from running? This now makes it possible for you to develop strength in other areas or to discover the value of stillness. You are not denying the difficulty, you are simply forcing your mind to look for the opportunity that is always hidden within it. Second, understand that this principle is about relentless, forward action. It is not a passive, philosophical reflection. It is an active, energetic engagement with your problems. When you see the obstacle, your next thought must be how to act upon it, how to use it. Grant's genius was not just his mindset, it was his relentless momentum. He was always moving forward, always turning the problem into the plan. Finally, see your obstacles as a mirror. Every challenge that frustrates you is reflecting a weakness or a deficiency within you that needs to be addressed. That difficult colleague is not just a nuisance, they are an opportunity to practice patience and communication. That tight deadline is not just a source of stress, it is an opportunity to develop focus and efficiency. The obstacle is a personal trainer, perfectly designed to strengthen the exact muscle you need to grow. The path to your goals will never be a straight, clear line. Life will always place stones in your way. Do not curse them. Do not try to go around them. See them for what they are, the stepping stones of your journey. The obstacle is not in your way. The obstacle is your way. Your great task is to learn how to see this, and then to have the courage to take the next step. Chapter 6: The Winter Rehearsal, the Power of Premeditatio Malorum. How often do you find yourself caught off guard by life's inevitable setbacks, feeling ambushed by bad news, or shattered by unexpected misfortune? We spend our days chasing sunshine, meticulously planning for success, and deliberately avoiding any thought of darkness or difficulty. We construct elaborate mental castles built on the flimsy foundation of eternal optimism, only for them to crumble at the first whisper of adversity. But what if there was an ancient, counterintuitive practice that could immunize you against fate's cruelest blows, transforming surprise into preparedness and fear into calm resolve? What if the secret to handling disaster was to deliberately, consciously, and regularly invite its contemplation into your mind? This is precisely what the Stoics called Premeditatio Malorum, which translates roughly to the premeditation of evils or the rehearsal of misfortune. This isn't a morbid exercise in pessimism, it is the ultimate form of psychological armor, a powerful mental training that inoculates you against the shock and despair that paralyze others. Think of it as a mental fire drill, where you simulate the worst-case scenarios not to attract them, but to disarm them of their power to surprise and overwhelm you. It is the wisdom of the seasoned sailor who inspects his ship for every conceivable leak before the storm, not because he wishes for the storm, but because he knows it will come. If our shield is to be truly unshakable, it must be proof against the sudden, jarring impact of bad fortune. This chapter will teach you how to calmly anticipate, thoughtfully visualize, and mentally rehearse your response to life's inevitable challenges, thereby stealing their thunder before they even strike. This powerful practice will transform you from a reactive victim of circumstance into a proactive master of your own composure. You are not simply bracing for impact, you are training your mind to find opportunity and strength even in the moment of collision. To grasp the profound, life-saving potential of Premeditatio Malorum, we will turn to a harrowing true story of leadership, survival, and an almost superhuman resilience forged in the brutal, unforgiving crucible of the Antarctic wilderness. We will learn from the legendary polar explorer, Sir Ernest Shackleton. In 1914, Sir Ernest Shackleton set out to achieve what no man had ever done, to cross the Antarctic continent via the South Pole. His ship, the Endurance, was a marvel of its time, designed to withstand the crushing ice of the polar seas. His crew of 27 men was handpicked for their skill, courage, and camaraderie. They departed from Plymouth, England, filled with hope and ambition, utterly unaware that their grand expedition was about to transform into the most astonishing tale of survival in the history of exploration. It was a journey that would push Premeditatio Malorum to its absolute limits, demonstrating its life-saving power with chilling clarity. The first whispers of doom began in the Weddell Sea. Shackleton's ship became trapped, then slowly, relentlessly, crushed by the impenetrable pack ice. For months, the Endurance was a prison, then a coffin, as the ice slowly twisted and tore it apart. On October 27, 1915, Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. The majestic Endurance finally succumbed, sinking into the icy depths, taking with it all their grand ambitions, all their scientific equipment, and most of their supplies. The crew was stranded, thousands of miles from civilization, marooned on a frozen, shifting ocean, facing almost certain death. This was the ultimate worst-case scenario. This was the Malorum that Shackleton had, in his own way, been preparing for his entire career. Shackleton was not a philosopher in the traditional sense, but his leadership exemplified Premeditatio Malorum in action. From the moment the ship was trapped, he began to mentally prepare for every conceivable disaster. He didn't just hope for the best, he relentlessly imagined the worst. He knew, with a terrible certainty, that the ship would likely be lost. He knew they would have to live on the ice. He knew they would have to make an impossible journey in open boats across some of the most treacherous seas on Earth. He didn't wait for these events to occur to begin thinking about them. He rehearsed them, over and over, in his mind. This mental rehearsal gave him an almost supernatural calm when the actual disasters struck. When the Endurance was finally crushed, there was no panic from Shackleton. He had already lost the ship in his mind weeks, even months, earlier. He immediately set about implementing the plans he had already conceived. He gathered the men, salvaged what little they could, and began the brutal, months-long existence on the shifting ice floes, drifting north towards open water. One of Shackleton's most remarkable examples of Premeditatio Malorum involved his strategic decision-making regarding supplies. Knowing that they might have to abandon the ship and trek across the ice, he ordered the crew to discard everything unnecessary, even sentimental items. When it came time to pack the lifeboats for the epic open boat journey, he insisted that a stove and sufficient fuel be taken, despite the extreme weight. This seemingly obvious decision was, in fact, a crucial act of Premeditatio Malorum. He anticipated the desperate need for warm food and drink to maintain morale and prevent hypothermia during the unimaginable exposure they would face. Most men would focus on speed and minimal weight. Shackleton focused on the vital necessities for the absolute worst-case conditions. He had already imagined the bone-chilling cold and soul-crushing despair. His most heroic act of Premeditatio Malorum came during the 800-mile open-boat journey in the 22.5-foot James Caird. After reaching the uninhabited Elephant Island, Shackleton knew they couldn't simply wait for rescue. It would never come. Their only hope was for him and a small crew to sail the tiny lifeboat through hurricane-force winds and mountainous seas to the whaling stations on South Georgia Island. This was a suicidal mission. But Shackleton had mentally walked through every step of this hellish journey. He had considered the waves, the cold, the thirst, the navigation. Because he had already faced these evils in his mind, he could face them in reality with unwavering purpose. His mental rehearsal of despair allowed him to lead with unshakable hope. The journey was one of the most incredible feats of navigation and endurance ever recorded. After 17 days of unimaginable hardship, Shackleton and his crew landed on South Georgia, only to find themselves on the wrong side of the island, separated from the whaling station by a treacherous, unmapped mountain range. Another seemingly insurmountable obstacle. But again, Shackleton had, in essence, mentally rehearsed this. He knew what he had to do. With 2 companions, he completed the first recorded crossing of South Georgia, a 36-hour, non-stop, death-defying trek over glacier and peaks, to finally reach help. And in the end, due to his extraordinary leadership and foresight, his constant, unflinching preparation for the worst, every single one of his 27 men survived. Shackleton proved that true resilience isn't born from blind optimism, but from eyes-wide-open realism. He didn't wish away the storm, he prepared for it, knowing that his and his men's survival depended on it. So, how do we integrate this life-saving practice of Premeditatio Malorum into our own lives? First, conscious negative visualization. Set aside a specific time, perhaps for just 5 minutes each morning or evening. Think about something you value deeply, your health, your job, a relationship. Now, consciously imagine losing it. Feel the discomfort. What would life be like without it? What would you miss? What would be the immediate consequences? Allow yourself to sit with that difficult visualization. The purpose is not to depress you, but to strip away the illusion that these things are permanent. You will discover 2 profound benefits: first, an immediate surge of gratitude for what you currently possess, and second, a clear-eyed understanding of how you would cope if the worst came to pass. Second, rehearse specific setbacks. Think about an upcoming challenge, a difficult conversation, a presentation, a financial concern. Now, in your mind, let it go wrong. The conversation turns hostile. You botch the presentation. The financial concern becomes a real crisis. How would you respond? What is the absolute worst that could happen? What would be your first rational step? Your second? By mentally mapping out your recovery, you build confidence and reduce the fear of the unknown. You take away the power of surprise. Third, journaling for preparedness. Keep a journal specifically for this exercise. Write down your current anxieties. For each one, articulate the worst-case scenario. Then, describe, in detail, what you would do. Not just what you would feel, but what specific actions you would take. If I lost my job, I would immediately update my resume, contact 5 people in my network, and begin exploring other industries. This transforms vague fear into concrete, actionable steps, turning dread into a practical plan. This is not inviting trouble. This is inviting preparedness. As Seneca wrote, he suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary. Premeditatio Malorum allows you to suffer a little in advance, in the safety of your mind, so that you suffer less, or not at all, when the real event unfolds. It is the training that allows you to walk into the storm not with dread, but with a quiet, confident resolve. You have already faced the worst. And because you have, you are ready for anything. You are not just protected, you are prepared. Chapter 7, Taming the Inner Beast, a Stoic Guide to Anger. There is a beast that lives inside each and every one of us. It lies dormant for much of the time, sleeping in the quiet chambers of our heart, but when it is provoked by insult or injustice, it awakens with a flash of fire and a deafening roar of self-righteousness. This is the beast of anger, and its call is perhaps the most seductive and dangerous poison known to the human soul. It promises you justice, it promises you strength, and it whispers that through its ferocity, your honor will be restored. But listen closely, for these are the most treacherous of lies. In truth, anger is a corrosive acid that dissolves reason, it shatters trust, and it leaves a permanent trail of wreckage and regret in its destructive wake. The great Stoic philosopher Seneca called anger a brevis insania, a brief madness, a temporary insanity during which we willingly and foolishly surrender the keys to our own mind. For in the very moment we believe we are at our most powerful, brandishing our rage like a righteous sword, we are in fact at our most helpless and vulnerable. We have become a puppet, and our strings are being pulled by an external event or another person's careless words. Our modern culture often mistakes this beast for a sign of strength, a mark of someone who won't be pushed around, but the Stoics knew it to be the ultimate sign of weakness. True strength, they taught, is not the explosive power to lash out, but the immense and quiet discipline to hold back. On the Stoic Shield we are forging, the mastery of anger is not a minor, decorative flourish, it is the central, unbreakable boss from which all other defenses radiate and gain their strength. In this chapter, we will learn how to recognize the beast's first stirrings, to see through its deceptive logic, and to tame it with calm, rational, and unwavering authority. Our guide in this most critical of human endeavors will be a man of immense physical power and a legendary, terrifying temper. We will learn from a man who discovered that the hardest and most important battle he would ever fight was not against the vast armies of the British Empire, but against the furious rage that burned like a volcano within his own heart, the first President of the United States, George Washington. Before he was the stoic, reserved icon we see on the dollar bill, the young George Washington was a force of nature, a man whose physical presence was as intimidating as his ambition. Towering over most of his contemporaries at well over 6 feet, he was a man of incredible physical strength and boundless energy. But this immense physical power was matched by an equally immense and often uncontrollable temper. His personal letters from his early career as a young officer in the French and Indian War are filled with furious, impatient complaints about his pay, his rank, and the incompetence of his superiors. He was driven by a burning desire for honor and respect, and he flew into a rage at any perceived slight. One famous incident perfectly illustrates the untamed beast within the young Washington. During a heated political dispute in 1755, Washington said something that deeply offended a smaller man named William Paine. Feeling his honor insulted, Paine did the unthinkable. He picked up a wooden stick and struck the towering Washington, knocking him to the ground. The humiliation was total. For a proud, ambitious Virginian officer, such an act was a public disgrace that, by the code of the day, could only be answered with a duel to the death. Washington's friend surely expected him to issue a challenge the very next morning. The beast of anger was roaring, demanding vengeance. This was the untamed Washington, a man whose passions often threatened to derail his own ambitions. His diaries and the accounts of his contemporaries are filled with stories of his volcanic outbursts at subordinates, his withering rebukes, and his palpable, intimidating rage when events did not meet his exacting standards. He was a man who knew, from painful experience, how a momentary loss of control could lead to disaster. And it was this self-awareness that set him on a lifelong path to tame the inner beast. The aftermath of his humiliation by William Paine became a pivotal moment in this journey. The next morning, Washington sent a note to Paine, requesting a meeting at a local tavern. Paine arrived, undoubtedly expecting to be challenged to a duel. Instead, the great man stood before him and did the last thing anyone expected: he apologized. Washington admitted that he had been in the wrong to provoke Paine with his words and asked for his forgiveness. This act of profound humility and self-mastery was, in its own way, more powerful than winning any duel. It was a declaration of war not on Paine, but on his own temper. He had looked the beast in the eye and, instead of letting it drag him toward violence and revenge, had chosen reason, honor, and reconciliation. This was not an isolated event, but part of a conscious, lifelong project of self-cultivation. As a schoolboy, Washington had meticulously copied out a list of 110 rules of civility and decent behavior, many of which deal directly with controlling one's emotions and showing respect to others. Rule number 1 was every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present. He understood, from a very young age, that emotional discipline was the bedrock of character and leadership. His relentless efforts bore fruit. By the time he was appointed commander of the Continental Army, he had transformed himself. He was now known for his profound reserve, his stoic demeanor, and an almost unshakable calm, even in the face of unimaginable disaster, like the starving, freezing winter at Valley Forge. This calm was not an absence of passion. It was a conquered, disciplined passion, held in check by an iron will. He had tamed the beast, but he had not killed it. He had, instead, learned to master it. We see this mastery in its most dramatic form during the Battle of Monmouth in 1778. In the heat of the battle, Washington discovered that his second-in-command, General Charles Lee, was retreating without orders, threatening the entire American line. Washington galloped to the front, and in a rare and terrifying display of his old fire, he unleashed a furious, profane tirade on Lee that, according to witnesses, was so powerful it seemed to wither the leaves on the trees. This was not a loss of control. This was the strategic unleashing of the beast. His anger was not a blind rage, it was a focused, calculated tool used to shock a subordinate, stop the retreat, and rally his terrified men. He showed that the ultimate mastery is not just about caging the beast, but knowing when, and for what purpose, to let it roar. Washington's lifelong battle provides the narrative, but the Stoics provide the practical, philosophical framework for our own struggle. Seneca, in his masterwork on anger, diagnoses the emotion with clinical precision. He explains that anger is not an involuntary reflex, but the result of a series of faulty judgments. It begins with the judgment, "I have been harmed." It is followed by a second, "This harm was unjust and done intentionally." And it culminates in the third and most dangerous judgment, "This person must be punished, I must have revenge." Anger, at its core, is a burning desire for retribution that ultimately harms us far more than the original offense ever could. The Stoic prescription for this brief madness is therefore not to manage anger, but to dismantle the faulty logic that creates it. First, and most importantly, delay. Seneca advises that when you feel the heat of anger rising, your first and only duty is to do nothing. Create a space between the stimulus and your response. Washington learned to do this by retiring to his tent to cool off. You can do it by walking away, counting to 10, or simply refusing to speak or type until the initial physiological wave has passed. Time is the enemy of anger. Given just a few moments, the madness will begin to subside, and reason can re-emerge. Second, interrogate your judgments. Once you have created that space, you must become a detective of your own thoughts. Challenge the 3 core judgments. Was it truly a harm, or was it just an inconvenience? A person cutting you off in traffic is not a harm, it is a momentary annoyance. Question the intent. Was it truly unjust and malicious, or could it have been an accident, a misunderstanding, or the result of their own ignorance or stress? The Stoics urge us to always assume incompetence before we assume malice. Finally, question the desire for revenge. Will lashing out actually solve the problem? Or will it escalate the conflict, damage the relationship, and leave you feeling ashamed? Third, cultivate empathy. The ultimate antidote to anger is to try and see the world from the other person's perspective. Are they tired? Stressed? Afraid? Are they acting from a place of pain that has nothing to do with you? Washington's apology to pain was a radical act of empathy. He chose to understand his own role in the conflict rather than focusing solely on his own wounded pride. Taming the inner beast is one of the most difficult and rewarding tasks of a human life. It is a daily practice of choosing reason over rage, reflection over reaction. True power, as Washington discovered, is not the freedom to express every fiery impulse. It is the profound and quiet strength of self-mastery. It is the wisdom to know that the only person you can ever truly control is yourself, and that in that control lies the foundation of all true leadership, inner peace, and unshakable resilience. Chapter 8, The Unbreachable Self, on Critics, Social Status, and Inner Worth. How much of your precious, unrepeatable life is lived for an audience? Think for a moment about the invisible crowd you perform for every day, an audience of critics, of admirers, of former classmates, and of anonymous strangers passing judgment from behind their screens. We have engineered a world where our sense of self-worth is relentlessly outsourced, a fluctuating stock price measured in likes, followers, and the fleeting, unreliable praise of the crowd. This fragile system turns us into anxious actors in our own lives, constantly adjusting our masks, our words, and our very personalities based on the shifting winds of applause or silence. It is a fragile, exhausting, and deeply unsatisfying way to live, turning our inner peace into a hostage held captive by the opinions of others. But what if you could build a fortress of self-worth so strong, so secure, and so deeply anchored in truth that no external opinion could ever breach its walls? Imagine a place within you where your value is not determined by the fickle crowd, but by the steadfast quality of your own character and the integrity of your own actions. This is the awesome power of the unbreachable self, the Stoic ideal of a mind that has achieved a calm indifference to both praise and blame. It represents the ultimate liberation from the modern tyranny of needing to be liked, to be approved of, and to be seen in a certain, carefully curated way. It is the art of learning to be the sculptor of your own statue, caring only for the truth of the form you are creating, not for the idle chatter of the marketplace. While this may be one of the most difficult disciplines in the Stoic art of living, it is by far one of the most rewarding. In this chapter, we will learn precisely how to reclaim our self-worth from the outside world and anchor it firmly, permanently, within our own control. This practice forms the smooth, polished surface of your shield, the impenetrable finish from which the poisoned arrows of both flattery and insult slide off harmlessly, unable to find purchase. Our inspiration for this task will be a man who lived his entire life in the blinding glare of the public eye, a man who was relentlessly praised and viciously criticized in equal measure. We will learn from a man who gave the world the ultimate creed for living a life of action, not of opinion, the 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was a hurricane of human energy. He was a man who seemed to live a dozen lives in the space of one. Born a sickly, asthmatic child, he famously built his own body through sheer force of will and punishing exercise. He was a naturalist, a cowboy in the Dakota Badlands, the police commissioner of New York City, a celebrated war hero who led his Rough Riders in a cavalry charge up San Juan Hill, and ultimately, the youngest man to ever become president. He was the living embodiment of his own philosophy of the strenuous life, a life of action, effort, and engagement. But a life lived with such vigor and conviction inevitably attracts a storm of opinion. Because Roosevelt was so active, so outspoken, and so determined to enact change, he was a massive and constant target. His political enemies and the powerful corporate trusts he sought to break called him a warmonger, an imperialist, a dangerous demagogue, and a power-hungry fraud. The press caricatured his famous toothy grin, his spectacles, and his energetic style, often portraying him as a wild child playing with the levers of power. He lived every single day in a blizzard of external judgment, a relentless barrage of both adulation from his supporters and venomous criticism from his detractors. It was this lifelong experience, this existence at the very center of the public arena, that gave him the unique authority to teach us where true worth is found. The lesson came in a speech he delivered on April 23, 1910. Roosevelt was no longer president. He was on a grand tour of Europe, a global celebrity, and he was invited to speak at the Sorbonne in Paris, one of the world's great centers of history and intellectualism. He was speaking to an audience of academics, artists, and thinkers, people who, by their very nature, were professional critics and observers. It was to this crowd that he delivered the immortal words that have since become a guiding light for leaders, athletes, artists, and anyone who has ever dared to create something new or take a difficult stand. In a long speech titled Citizenship in a Republic, he uttered the passage that would forever be known as the man in the arena. He said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." This is not just beautiful prose, it is a profound declaration of Stoic philosophy. Let's deconstruct its wisdom. First, he dismisses the critic. It is not the critic who counts. This is a direct echo of Epictetus, who taught that the opinions of others are external to us and therefore have no power to harm our inner self unless we grant them that power. Roosevelt gives us explicit permission to ignore the jeers from the cheap seats, to disregard the judgment of those who are not willing to enter the arena themselves. Second, he values effort over outcome. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. Notice, he doesn't say the credit belongs to the man who wins. The honor is in the striving, in the willingness to get your face marred by dust and sweat and blood. This is the very core of the Stoic dichotomy of control. We cannot control the outcome, whether we succeed or fail, but we can control our effort, our intention, and the courage with which we act. That is where true credit lies. Third, he embraces imperfection. The man in the arena errs, who comes short again and again. Roosevelt understood that the fear of making a mistake, the fear of looking foolish, is what keeps most people paralyzed on the sidelines. This fear is almost always rooted in what others will think. By celebrating the inevitability of error and shortcoming, he liberates us to act, to try, and to fail, knowing that failure in a worthy cause is infinitely more honorable than a life of timid inaction. Finally, he establishes an internal scorecard. The man in the arena spends himself in a worthy cause. The worth is determined by the cause itself and by his devotion to it, not by the scoreboard or the crowd's reaction. This is the key to building an unbreachable self. Your sense of value must come from your own commitment to your principles and your own assessment of your efforts. How do we apply this timeless wisdom and build our own arena in the distracting noise of the 21st century? First, you must define your arena. What is the worthy cause to which you are willing to dedicate yourself? Is it building a business? Raising a family with kindness and integrity? Creating a work of art? Mastering a difficult skill? Becoming physically and mentally healthy? Be specific. Your arena is the domain where you have decided to strive valiantly. When you are clear on what your arena is, the opinions of those outside of it begin to fade in importance. Second, you must curate your critics. The Stoics were not against all feedback, they were against giving weight to uninformed, malicious, or unhelpful opinion. Roosevelt's critic is the person in the stands who offers nothing but scorn. You must learn to distinguish this person from a trusted coach, a wise mentor, or a loyal friend who is in the arena with you, offering constructive advice to help you improve. Actively seek feedback from those you respect, actively ignore the noise from everyone else. Third, you must practice indifference to praise. This is the other, more difficult side of the coin. It is easy to aspire to ignore insults, but it is much harder to be unmoved by flattery. The Stoics warned that if you are overjoyed by praise, you will be equally devastated by criticism. You must treat both as impostors. When someone praises you, receive it with quiet gratitude, but do not let it inflate your ego or become the source of your self-worth. See both praise and blame as external data, not as a verdict on your soul. The world will always be filled with commentators, critics, and a chorus of opinions. Let them have their say. It has nothing to do with you. Your place is in the arena, with your face and hands dirty from the work that matters. Build your self-worth on the unshakable foundation of your own character, your own efforts, and your own virtues. Do this, and you will have constructed a fortress for your soul that nothing, and no one, can ever breach. Chapter 9, The Sympathetic Soul, on Stoic Duty, Kindness, and Connection, Oikeiôsis. What is the common caricature of a true Stoic? For many, it is a cold, emotionless statue, a detached and solitary figure, immune to the world's suffering only because they have made themselves immune to its joys. We have, over the last several chapters, been meticulously building an inner fortress, forging a shield designed to protect our tranquility, which might seem to reinforce this very image of isolation. But now, we must turn our attention to the most profound, the most challenging, and the most misunderstood aspect of this entire philosophy. For I must tell you a great truth, the Stoic Shield was never, ever meant to isolate you from the world. It was forged to make you more effective, more resilient, and more compassionate within it. Inner peace is not the final goal of Stoicism, it is merely the secure foundation upon which the real work is to be built. The true goal, the ultimate purpose of all this training, is to serve others, to contribute to the great human community, and to act with virtue on a cosmic stage. The ancient Stoics had a beautiful and powerful word for this core belief, Oikeiôsis. It is the deep, innate recognition that we are all kin, all fellow citizens of the cosmos, all interconnected parts of one single, living organism. It is the fundamental understanding that to harm another person is to ultimately harm yourself, as a hand that strikes its own body is still part of the same whole. We were not born for ourselves alone, the Stoics taught, we were born for each other. Therefore, your shield is not a wall to hide behind. It is the very thing that gives you the strength to venture bravely out from the fortress into the chaos of the world to help others, without losing your own peace in the process. What if the ultimate expression of your resilience was not your detachment, but the depth and consistency of your compassion? In this chapter, we will dissolve the persistent myth of the unfeeling, selfish Stoic and instead embrace our sacred, joyful duty to our fellow human beings. Our guide to this expansive and generous worldview will be the one man who had every excuse to isolate himself from the messy affairs of humanity. We will learn from the most powerful man in the world, who nevertheless reminded himself every single morning of his humble duty to others. The Roman Emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Imagine being Marcus Aurelius. You are the absolute ruler of the entire known world, an empire stretching from Britain to Syria. Your days are an endless procession of duties, judging legal cases, managing a vast bureaucracy, planning military campaigns against invading tribes, and dealing with a devastating plague that is sweeping through your lands. You are surrounded by schemers, flatterers, and people who want something from you. Betrayal is a constant threat. The burden of 100 million lives rests squarely on your shoulders. No one in history has ever had more reason to become cynical, to detach, and to view other people as mere obstacles or tools. Yet, when we open his private journal, the book we now call Meditations, we do not find the writings of a weary, isolated ruler. We find a man actively and relentlessly fighting against that temptation. We find a man reminding himself, over and over, of his connection to and his duty for the very people who frustrated him the most. His most famous passages reveal a morning routine designed to fortify his social character. In Book 5, he writes, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work, as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm." For Marcus, his job title was human being first and emperor a distant second. He believed, as a core tenet of his philosophy, that human beings were designed by nature for cooperation, just as our 2 hands, our 2 feet, and our 2 rows of teeth are designed to work in concert. We were born to work together, he wrote. To act selfishly, to refuse to help others, was to act against our own nature. Even more powerfully, he developed a specific mental script to prepare himself for the difficult people he knew he would encounter each day. He wrote in Book 2, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This sounds cynical at first, but what follows is a masterclass in Stoic empathy. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. We are all part of the same whole, and I can neither be harmed by any of them, for no one can implicate me in ugliness, nor can I be angry with my kinsman or hate him. This is the practical application of Oikeiôsis. He sees the most frustrating people not as enemies, but as mistaken family members. They are kin who are lost, who are acting out of ignorance, not malice. This perspective made it impossible for him to truly hate them, and it prevented their negativity from disturbing his own inner peace. His shield wasn't just deflecting their actions, it was transmuting his perception of them from enemies into misguided brothers. This profound sense of connection was beautifully illustrated by an earlier Stoic philosopher named Hierocles, who asked his students to perform a powerful visualization. Imagine yourself, he said, at the center of a series of concentric circles. The first, innermost circle contains your own mind and body. The next circle contains your immediate family. The next, your extended family. Following that are your neighbors, your fellow citizens, your countrymen, and finally, in the largest, outermost circle, the entire human race. According to Hierocles, the primary task of a practicing Stoic is to spend their life consciously and deliberately drawing these outer circles inward. The goal is to contract the circles, to treat your cousins as you would your siblings, your fellow citizens as you would your cousins, and ultimately, to treat every member of the human race as your cherished kinsman. This is the active, daily work of expanding your sense of self and your sphere of moral responsibility. It is the opposite of selfish isolation. This philosophy is built upon the even grander Stoic concept of sympathetia, the belief that the entire universe, all of nature, is one single, interconnected, living organism. Every person, every animal, every star, every stone, all are inextricably linked. What affects one part of this cosmic web inevitably affects all the others. As Marcus Aurelius succinctly put it, what is not good for the beehive is not good for the bee. This cosmic perspective makes kindness, cooperation, and social duty not just sentimental ideals, but the most rational and logical way to live in harmony with the nature of reality. Selfishness, from this viewpoint, is a form of insanity. It is the bee declaring war on its own hive. So how do we, in our modern, often fragmented world, practice this expansive and unifying philosophy? First, practice the fellow human meditation. The next time you are in public, on a train, in a grocery store, walking down the street, look at the strangers around you. For each person your eyes fall upon, silently repeat to yourself a simple phrase like, a fellow citizen of the cosmos, or my kinsman. Notice how this simple act of relabeling begins to change your feelings. The anonymous, potentially annoying other starts to become a fellow traveler. This practice directly counters the tribalism and division that define so much of our modern life. Second, actively contract hierarchical circles. Once a week, pick one person from one of your outer circles, a distant relative, a colleague you barely know, a public figure you disagree with. Spend 5 minutes actively trying to pull their circle closer. Meditate on your common humanity. Like you, they have fears. Like you, they have people they love. Like you, they have hopes for the future. This conscious exercise in empathy is a powerful workout for your sympathetic soul. Third, reframe your contributions as your highest purpose. See your work, your family duties, and any acts of service not as chores that take you away from your real life, but as the very arena in which your Stoicism is practiced. Building your shield, cultivating your inner peace, all of it is training for this. The purpose of becoming strong is so that you can lift up others. The purpose of becoming calm is so that you can be a steadying presence for those in distress. The final and most noble use of your Stoic shield is to shelter others from the storm. The Stoic path does not end in a quiet, secluded fortress of the self. That is merely the base camp, the place where we gather our strength and find our center. The true summit, the ultimate goal of all our striving, is a life of joyful, courageous, and virtuous service to the great human family. The unbreachable self is not an isolated self. It is a self so fundamentally secure, so deeply rooted in its own worth, that it can afford to be completely and compassionately open to the world. Chapter 10: The North Star, the Four Virtues and a Flourishing Life. After all this work, after all this dedicated and difficult training, where does the path of the practicing Stoic ultimately lead? We have learned to forge a shield of resilience, to master our perceptions, to direct our actions with intention, and to accept the hand of fate with a willing and courageous heart. But you must understand that these remarkable skills are the tools, not the final creation. They are the ship that carries you, not the ultimate destination. The final destination, the great and noble purpose of this entire philosophy, is a state the ancient Greeks and Romans called eudaimonia. This magnificent word is often weakly translated as happiness, but it signifies something far deeper, far richer, and far more durable: a flourishing human life, a life of profound meaning, moral excellence, and true fulfillment. But how does one navigate toward such an extraordinary state in the midst of life's chaotic and unpredictable seas? The Stoics taught that we need a constant and unwavering guide, a celestial point of reference in the moral sky that is visible even on the darkest of nights. This guide is not a single, flickering principle, but a brilliant constellation of four interconnected and eternally bright stars, the four cardinal virtues. These stars are wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. They are not abstract, lofty ideals to be admired from a distance. They are the active, living, breathing qualities of a perfect character in action. Every single tool we have learned together, from taming our anger to rehearsing for misfortune, from loving our fate to ignoring the critics, is practiced in the devoted service of these four virtues. They are not just decorative elements on your shield. They are the very reason you carry the shield in the first place. In this final chapter of our training, we will explore this guiding constellation and learn how it forms the ultimate navigation system for a good and meaningful life. Our example for this final lesson will be a man who used these very virtues to navigate 27 years of utter darkness in a tiny prison cell. We will learn from a man who emerged from that crucible not broken, but remade, ready to lead a nation with a character forged in the inextinguishable fire of virtue, the great Nelson Mandela. In 1964, Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life in prison. He was sent to the brutal, windswept Robben Island, a place designed not just to contain political prisoners, but to break their bodies, their minds, and their spirits. The conditions were horrific: hard labor in a lime quarry that permanently damaged his eyesight, meager rations, and the constant, dehumanizing cruelty of the guards. This prison cell was designed to be the end of his story. Instead, through a heroic act of will, Mandela transformed it into a forge, a place where he would hammer his own character into a weapon of virtue. For 27 years, he used the four cardinal virtues as his guide, his sustenance, and his path to freedom, long before he was ever released. The first virtue he mastered, the bedrock of all the others, was temperance, or self-control. The entire purpose of the prison was to strip him of control. But Mandela understood the Stoic truth that his inner world was his own. He responded to the prison's chaos by imposing an even stricter, more profound discipline on himself. He famously began each day at 5 a.m. with a rigorous exercise routine in his tiny 7 by 9-foot cell. He controlled his emotions, refusing to show hatred or despair to his captors. He controlled his mind, using his time to study, to think, and to plan. By mastering himself, he demonstrated to the prison authorities, and to himself, that they could cage his body, but they could never, ever imprison his will. Upon this foundation of temperance, he built his courage. This was not just the physical courage to endure back-breaking labor and abuse. It was the supreme moral courage to never give up hope, to never abandon his principles, and to continue to lead his fellow prisoners. He organized hunger strikes to fight for more humane conditions, risking severe punishment. He held fast to his vision of a democratic and free South Africa during the darkest days of apartheid, when such a vision seemed like a madman's fantasy. His courage was a quiet, steady flame that inspired all those around him and proved that the human spirit could not be crushed by concrete and steel. This courage was in the service of the third and most crucial virtue, justice. For Mandela, the struggle was never about personal vengeance or power, it was always about justice. Inside the prison, he transformed the daily fight for survival into a classroom for justice. He organized secret classes, turning Robben Island into the Mandela University, where prisoners educated themselves and debated the future of their nation. Most remarkably, he began to practice a radical form of justice toward his oppressors. He insisted that his fellow prisoners learn Afrikaans, the language of their captors. This was not a mere tactic, it was a profound act of empathy, an attempt to understand the minds and the history of the very people who held the keys to his cell. He saw them not as monstrous enemies, but as fellow human beings trapped on the wrong side of an unjust system. This was the seed of the revolutionary compassion that would later save his country. And all of these virtues were guided by the fourth and final star in the constellation, wisdom. This is practical wisdom, the art of knowing how to apply the right virtue in the right amount at the right time. Mandela possessed the wisdom to know which battles to fight and which to concede. He had the wisdom to play the long game, to understand that their struggle was a marathon that required patience as much as passion. But his greatest wisdom was in recognizing the corrosive nature of hatred. He knew that if he held on to bitterness towards his captors, he would remain their prisoner forever, locked in a mental cage of his own making. In one of the most profound statements of Stoic wisdom ever uttered, he reflected on the day of his release, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." When Nelson Mandela was finally released in 1990, the virtues he had so painstakingly forged in the darkness of his cell became the tools he used to lead his nation into the light. South Africa was a powder keg, ready to explode into a bloody civil war. But Mandela, the statesman, guided his actions by the same North Star. His policy of truth and reconciliation was a masterclass in justice and wisdom. Instead of the vengeful victor's justice that so many expected, he chose a path designed to heal a wounded nation. His unwavering commitment to a multiracial democracy, exemplified by his decision to embrace the Springboks rugby team, a symbol of white apartheid, during the 1995 World Cup, was an act of almost unbelievable courage and temperance. He had the courage to risk the anger of his own supporters and the temperance to absorb their criticism, all in the service of a greater unity. This is eudaimonia in action. Nelson Mandela's life, particularly after his release, was not merely a happy. It was flourishing. It was a life of immense purpose, of profound moral beauty, and of service to a cause far greater than himself. He achieved a state of inner fulfillment and outer effectiveness that stands as one of the greatest testaments to the power of human character in all of history. This is the ultimate promise of our journey together. The Stoic Shield, and all the practices we have learned, are not an end in themselves. They are the instruments that allow you to pursue a life of virtue without being thrown off course by fear, by anger, by distraction, or by the blows of fortune. So now, you must learn to navigate by this same constellation. In any situation you face, in any decision you must make, you have a guidance system. You have a North Star. Ask yourself, what is the wise thing to do here? What would be the courageous action? What does justice demand of me? And what does temperance, or self-control, require? The good life, the flourishing life, is the virtuous life. By focusing your energy not on external rewards, but on the internal cultivation of your character, on being a little wiser, a little braver, a little more just and self-controlled today than you were yesterday, you are walking the same noble path as Marcus Aurelius and Nelson Mandela. You are building not just a resilient life, but a beautiful one. Look to the 4 stars of the Stoic constellation. Let them guide your every step. In their steady, unwavering light, you will not only find your peace, you will find your purpose, your meaning, and your path to a truly flourishing life. Conclusion: Forging your shield, a lifelong practice. Our journey together through the ancient, sunlit halls of Stoic wisdom is now drawing to a close. But let us be absolutely clear on one vital point: this is not an end, but a commencement. This is the profound and quiet moment you step out of the philosopher's forge, shield in hand, ready to finally face the inevitable storm of your own life. We have, over our time together, meticulously assembled this shield, piece by piece, riveting it together with the timeless wisdom of the ages. We laid its unshakable foundation on the bedrock of what you alone can control. We learned to polish its bright surface by mastering the powerful stories your inner scribe tells you. We tempered its hard metal in the sacred, roaring fire of Amor, Fati, learning not just to accept, but to love our fate. We sharpened its cutting edge with the constant, clarifying whisper of Memento, Mori, remembering that our time here is precious and short. We discovered how to use this shield not merely to defend, but to advance, turning every obstacle we face into the way forward. We have practiced the winter rehearsal in the safety of our minds, preparing our souls for any misfortune. We have confronted and begun to tame the inner beast of anger, and we have learned to turn a deaf ear to the critics in the stands, anchoring our worth within. We found that the shield's true and noble purpose is to give us the strength to connect with and serve others with a deep and abiding compassion. And finally, we learn to navigate not by the fleeting, deceptive lights of the world, but by the eternal North Star of the 4 great virtues. You now possess the complete blueprint, the full operating manual, for a life of inner peace and unshakable resilience. The only question that remains, the only one that has ever truly mattered, is this: what will you do with it, starting now? Philosophy, Seneca reminds us, is not a subject for mere academic debate or for showing off in conversation. It is a tool to be used. Its wisdom is meant to be lived, to be practiced, to be felt in the very marrow of your bones. The value of this audiobook will not be determined by what you understood while listening, but by what you apply when you are faced with your next moment of frustration, your next setback, your next taste of fear. The work is not over, the real work has just begun. To that end, allow me to offer a simple framework for your lifelong practice, a way to keep your shield strong and your philosophy alive every single day. Begin your day like Marcus Aurelius. Before your feet even touch the floor, perform the morning ritual. Remind yourself of your purpose as a human being, to act with virtue and to cooperate with others. Prepare your mind for the difficult people you may encounter, not with cynicism, but with a profound sense of empathy and kinship. Briefly review the challenges that lie ahead in your day, and for each one, draw that sacred line in the sand, distinguishing with clarity what is within your control and what is not, resolving to focus all your energy on the former. Then, throughout your day, be the vigilant editor of your inner scribe. Life will provide the raw data, a stressful email, a delayed train, a critical comment. Your automatic, untrained response will be to write a story of frustration or victimhood. This is your moment. Pause. Create that sacred space between stimulus and response. Analyze the automatic story. And then, consciously rewrite the script. Reframe the obstacle as an opportunity. See the challenge as a test of your character. This is the daily, moment-to-moment practice of forging your reality from the inside out. And in the evening, follow the wisdom of Seneca and conduct a brief evening reflection. Before you sleep, ask yourself 3 simple questions. What did I do well today, according to my philosophy? Where did I fall short? Where did I let the beast of anger or fear take the reins? And what can I learn from both my successes and my failures to be just a little bit better tomorrow? This is not an exercise in self-criticism. It is a calm, honest, and compassionate process of daily calibration, the quiet work of a craftsman perfecting their art. You will have days where you forget every lesson in this audiobook. You will get angry. You will worry about things you cannot control. You will care about the opinion of a stranger. When this happens, know that you are not failing. You are simply being human. The goal is not an impossible perfection, the goal is progress. The Stoic path is a lifelong journey, and all that is asked of you is that you get up, dust yourself off, pick up your shield, and take the next step. You are not alone on this path. You are walking in the footsteps of emperors, slaves, artists, and leaders. And today, you are part of a global community of millions who are rediscovering this ancient wisdom as an antidote to the chaos of modern life. If this guide has provided you with value, if it has given you even one tool to make your life more tranquil and resilient, then I ask you to join us in our Stoic duty of sharing this wisdom with others. Help us reach those who are still lost in the storm. Please take a moment to like this audiobook, subscribe for more practical wisdom from Prestige Mind Collections, and share it with just one person in your life who you feel needs to build their own shield. Your support is an act of service that helps this timeless knowledge find its way to those who need it most. The storms of life will come. Fortune is unpredictable. People can be difficult. None of that will ever change. But from this day forward, you can change. The world outside is not yours to command, but your inner world, the citadel of your mind, is your sovereign territory. You have the tools. You have the wisdom. You have the shield. The great Stoic Epictetus once laid down the ultimate challenge and the ultimate description of a philosopher in action. He said, "Show me someone who is sick and yet happy, in peril and yet happy, dying and yet happy, in exile and happy, in disgrace and happy. Show me a Stoic." That is the challenge that now lies before you. To live your life in such a way that you become the living proof of this philosophy's power. To become a source of calm strength and quiet virtue in a loud and turbulent world. Go now, and live a life worthy of your principles. Forge your shield every single day.